Hello and welcome. Decentralized Autonomous Organizations, recent developments. This is Roger Royce with the 10,000 Startups podcast. I'm a partner with Haynes Boone in Palo Alto. I do emerging growth and venture capital. But today I'm going to talk a little bit about what's been going on with DAOs. That's Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably already know what a DAO is. Right? It is basically a platform. It runs on smart contracts and issues tokens to its members. And through that platform, they have a decentralized system for conducting almost any kind of business, theoretically anyway. But it seems to be most well suited to things like investment clubs, where parties can pool their resources by buying tokens, and then the organization, whatever it is, the DAO, can go ahead and conduct its business or carry on its investment activities. Now, I want to just say a few words about DAO for those of you that might not be familiar with them. They are getting more and more popular, even though there are some real uncertainties around it. And there's some recent cases that make things even more uncertain. But the benefit of a DAO is, if you think about it, it's basically you're putting a business on the blockchain, in effect, instead of having a legal entity. In that way, it's very decentralized, it's transparent, it's immutable, it's all those things that blockchain allows you to be. It's used for distributed apps, for social clubs. That's a perfect example. Investment vehicles lends itself well. You can have an investment vehicle without having to have all of those fees that managers typically get, since it's decentralized. Operates on smart contracts on the blockchain or some distributed ledger system. So there's very low friction, let's say zero friction, very low cost. We don't have to form an entity, and it's fast. So decentralized, transparent, automated, and efficient. And also, some people think it's borderless, although there's some cases that cast some doubt on that characterization, but it is definitely secure. It is until it gets hacked anyway. And we saw that, I think it was 2016. When you think of DAO, you might think of the DAO, which did get hacked to the tune of quite a bit of money. I think it's about $40 million, resulted in all sorts of lawsuits, resulted in the SEC getting involved because they had advertised this entity as just like you were selling a security, and told people that what they were getting was just like a share of stock in a company. So they were held to the rules around securities laws. You may recall that very controversial, but the company did a fork and recovered most of what was lost. But nevertheless, it put DAOs on the map and also put them right in the crosshairs of the SEC. And that sort of brings us to the first issue we have with a DAO. Do we have securities risk? And the SEC seems to think so. There have been several actions against DAO for not complying with US securities laws, and on the theory that what's actually happening is that you have something that is selling a security. So that is a risk. A bigger risk is probably regulatory risk, because when the SEC is the best friend of the CFTC, right, the Commodities Futures Trading Organization. So what you might have is something that's trading in futures, and that brings you into the anti-money laundering, know your customer, etc., the whole regulatory regime that we're trying to avoid in the first place. There's certainly tax risk, and I can just tell you as a general rule, well, first of all, as a rule, U.S. persons, that's residents or citizens, pay tax on their worldwide income. Doesn't much matter if you get that income through a DAO or some other way, and it doesn't much matter how you characterize the DAO. I'll talk more about that later. You're going to be taxable on your share, either usually immediately, if not immediately, certainly eventually when those earnings come home and are repatriated. Now, the bigger problem, I think, because we all know about the risks and we can do things. We can comply. We can just comply with the regulations. We can comply with even the SEC rules. It's not that difficult, honestly, even though people might not think they have to or might not worry too much about it. Bigger problems have come up with regard to the liability of the token holders in the DAO, because if it's engaged in some sort of activity that could give rise to some liability, well, who's going to pay for that? There is no organization to sue, right? It's just a platform. And there's been some cases that consider, as a matter of state law, depending on what state you're in, that the token holders in the DAO are general partners of a general partnership, meaning they have unlimited liability for, and it's joint and several for all of, meaning that any one partner can be dinged for the entire debt of the entity. Sarkoony versus the BZX DAO, California law, is a case that established general partner liability. Now that's not new news, that's old news, but there's been other cases now that have raised that issue on other states' laws. More recently, in a case, I believe it was under New York law, it was True Return Systems versus MakerDAO. The DAO was sued for patent infringement, basically. So the holder of the patent said, "Look, this whatever it is, decentralized autonomous organization, is infringing on our patent," and it defended quite cleverly with the idea that, "Look, we're not an entity, so we can't be sued." Interesting argument. Of course, the plaintiff said, "Well, of course you are. You're just an unincorporated business entity." And this is sort of an arcane question of federal law, I would say. We'll see how it turns out. But real question: can it even be sued? And I think where that's going to go on this, under the rules under federal laws, we're going to look at the law of the state where the court's located. And we already know that if you're in California, it's not too hard to find a general partnership in these cases. And that is something that can be sued and everybody gets held liable. Interestingly, let's follow that along a little bit. Let's suppose it is a general part, because the tax issues are really fascinating here. People don't really pay a lot of attention to it. Everybody thinks it's because it's blockchain, nobody has to pay tax. Doesn't work that way. So there's one of a few different things it could be. Let's suppose that it is a general partnership under state law. That means each individual owner is going to be taxed on their share of income. Okay, that's just the way partnerships, they're pass-throughs, that's how they're taxed. Okay, well, let's suppose that it's a foreign partnership. Doesn't matter if you're a U.S. person, if you have an interest in it, you're taxed on your share of the income. Let's suppose that it's widely held. Now we have what we call a publicly traded partnership, which is taxed like a corporation. Well, number one, is it a foreign corporation or is it a domestic corporation? Probably domestic, most of these, if they're managed here in the US, or if you have a lot of US holders, or if they take advantage of US law. And if that's the case, then all of its income is subject to tax at the corporate level. If it's foreign, because we've managed to avoid all those rules, well, the owners still have to pick up their share of income under a provision called PFIC, Passive Foreign Investment Company, or might even be effectively connected with a trade or business. So you can see that almost everywhere you go is like a maze. You're going to run into a wall that's going to end up in you being taxed. Very difficult to navigate this. Regulatory, securities, and tax. So I think what a lot of DAOs have done over the last few years is just kind of they bit the bullet and have conceded the issue and said, look, we're just going to wrap our DAO in an entity. Because at least if we put an LLC, a limited liability company around it, then we have limited liability. We personally won't be liable for the obligations of this entity. It doesn't help you in your tax issues, but it certainly does help on the liability issues. So Delaware has a very flexible statutes. Very easy to simply make your DAO a Delaware limited liability company. Now, and of course, Wyoming, as everybody probably knows, they've enacted a very special statute. They have a form of DAO in Wyoming that, it is an LLC, and it acts just like an LLC. I should say it acts just like a DAO with an LLC wrapper. So, and as you can see, that kind of cuts against the whole purpose of doing this. We wanted to avoid friction, we wanted to avoid entities, and we wanted to avoid anything that might give us an easy target. And we just really haven't done that. But what we've done is we've limited liability, and we've also sort of more carefully defined what it is that parties have. Now, is this going to be the death of the DAO? I kind of doubt it. I think the Wyoming statute is really well drafted. And I think the Wyoming DAO preserves most of the basics. It's just that we have a little extra cost in putting that entity in place. And again, like I say, we can do that in any state. I really like Delaware when it comes to limited liability companies, so that would work as well. And I'm sure there's other states that would work for this. So anyhow, Roger Royce, 10,000 Startups Podcast, some recent developments on the DAO. Be careful out there. Thank you.